Hola, welcome everyone to Three Count Commentaries. Well, it's not even fair to call it Three Count Commentaries. That requires pro wrestling. We're doing a movie review here today. I just saw Predator Badlands. About the movie ended about maybe 40 minutes ago, and obviously there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, it'll be that kind of goddamn day, huh? So this is going to be spoilers. So I definitely suggest that if you have not seen the movie, you do not watch this any further unless you don't have any interest. Then, hey, stick around. But if you have any interest in the movie, I would uh, not listen to this. I would listen to this after you watched it. Okay. So, despite the title, which I will admit is clickbait, I thought the movie was not bad. Obviously, there were themes and ideas and concepts that they wanted to get into the movie that are subversive, let's say. Um, this is, I believe, the third Predator film since Fox was bought by Disney. I did not see Killer of Killers, but I did see Prey, and I do remember giving Prey some pretty good review. I actually liked Prey. This one was it wasn't a bad movie. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. It's clear that the agenda has been turned down quite a bit, but the agenda is still there. Um, and we're going to talk about it because I don't want to sit here and talk about how the movie is woke because I don't think it's a woke movie. But Hollywood clearly has an agenda, and they're not easing up on that agenda. All right, it's they went from dumping 10 tablespoons of salt in your Kool-Aid to maybe about two or three. Okay, they just turned the volume down a little bit, but it's still there. Um, Ultimately, we're going to get into the movie in a second. We're going to get into the David Mamet questions, and then I'm going to play some audio from this guy talking about. I think he's talking about the new Predator movie is from TikTok or something like that, and he made me absolutely sick. And I want to reply to what he said. So we're going to talk about all of that tonight, and hopefully, no, this is not a spoiler-free review. This is going to be 100% spoilers. I don't see a point of doing a movie review with no spoilers. I just don't. I have to tell you what's in the movie in order to tell you whether the movie is any good or not. So I'm gonna try not to spoil. Well, I got to spoil the major plot points. I mean, it just is what it is. So if you don't want spoilers, I will give you 15 seconds. Matter of fact, I'll give you a minute to get out of here if you don't want spoilers. So I'm just gonna yammer for about a minute or so, and I'll just talk about whether I like the movie. Generally speaking, I like the movie. Um, was not a big fan of the ending, but generally the movie was pretty solid. It wasn't too boring. There were some boring parts to it, and I think maybe it went a little long. Um, there was a whole lot of therapy in the movie, which bothers me a whole lot. I'm sick of the therapy culture that we got in America, in the United States, and in Europe and Canada and all that kind of stuff right now. I'm very aggravated by the amount of therapy we're doing. But ultimately, like I said, I don't think it was necessarily a bad movie. I think that you would like it, but you should know going in that there is an agenda. And it's actually not that difficult to catch it either. So again, that minute is almost up. And then we're going to get into the major plot elements of Predator Badlands. All right. So the minute is just about up. Let's get into the major plot elements. So the movie's protagonist is named Deck. He is a young Yautja that is about to undergo his initiation ritual to become a full member of his clan. The opening scenes of the movie feature him training with his brother Quelle as their father is out on a mission. Um, at this point, Quelle says, "Hey, Deck is supposedly a weak member of the clan, and he's struggling, but Deck shows a whole lot of heart, a whole lot of determination. Even when Quelle has him defeated, he refuses to yield. He refuses to back down. He is what he is what the clan wants him to be. You know, at least in that perspective, he's willing to die with honor if necessary." Quelle shows him some compassion, and together they choose Deck's initiate hunt. So they have to. He picks a target. He has to go complete that task in order to become a full member of the clan. Because their father sees Deck as being weak, Deck chooses the hardest possible mission, which is to defeat a creature called the Kalisk, and that is a creature that even their father is afraid of. So, in order to prove himself to his father, he's going to hunt a creature that even his father is afraid of. And when the father returns, Quelle says, "Hey," or Quay says, "Hey, you know, he's going to hunt the Kalisk." And father, unnamed father, at that, basically says, "You were supposed to kill him. He's weak. He's useless. We don't need him. Get rid of him." And Quelle says, "Look, he's going to hunt the Kalisk. He's going to be successful." And the father says, "Weakness has to be cold. Deck is weak. Get rid of him. You should have gotten rid of him. You should have killed him in his sleep if you had to." And Quay protects Deck and locks him behind some kind of shield into a spaceship. Quay then fights the father and is killed in battle. Deck is impotent behind the glass, watching his brother get killed by their father, and he is executed. The last words of his brother is, "Bring back the trophy." Basically, go be successful in your mission, become a full Yautja, prove me right, become an honorable Yautja soldier or whatever. Okay, this is a perfect setup here. I love this. If this was what the movie was, it'd have been a 10 out of 10. Would watch again. The next several scenes, however, it changes a little bit. So in his last efforts before his head is cut off, Quay sends Deck to the Kalisk planet. And obviously, now we're in an adventure story where Deck has to find and hunt the Kalisk. Instead, he comes across a half synthetic humanoid android by the name of Thea that is tied up and bound by something or other. And to make a long story short, Thea is a part of a army of androids that were sent to this planet also to hunt the Kalisk. A lot of her kind were destroyed and half of her body was cut off. And she says, "Hey, if you help me, I will help you." And so Deck decides to help her find her lower body. And in exchange, she will tell him everything that she knows about the Kalisk. Throughout this part of the movie, this is where we get the therapy session because Thea is extremely fucking talkative. And she yaps endlessly through the movie. That's one of the things that kind of aggravates me a whole lot about American media is they don't know how to let silence. They don't want it feels like it's radio where they constantly have to talk. There's constant talking. And she just fills every moment with chatter. And she jokes a lot too. And it's really weird because she's supposed to be like some kind of android, but she's very human in a sense. And she is the therapist for the Yautja, for Deck. And their relationship is essentially them learning about each other and Deck trying to figure out, whether he can defeat the Callus. And one of the things that is a theme in the story is coming up with Deck bumping heads against Yautja society. One earlier in the movie when they first meet, he refuses her help because Yautja have to hunt alone. But she says, well, I'm not another person. I'm an android. So basically, I'm a tool, like a weapon. You can just use me like a map almost, kind of. And he accepts that. So he straps her to his back and he's carrying her around for most of the movie, trying to find her legs. And she's just chattering, just constant fucking chattering. And in terms of her being the one to try to teach Deck how to combat not the callus, the creature that he is hunting, but to combat Yautja society. She's talking about how she was an android, but she was engineered with higher levels of sentimentality. Her and her Tessa, they which is the other android that's in the movie, well, one of the other androids in the movie, what they call synths. They were engineered to have higher sensitivity. And she tells the story about how her and her friend were separated when they tried to hunt the Callus, and the Callus was too powerful for them. It defeated them, cut her in half, and now she's lost without Tessa. She doesn't know. She wants to know where Tessa is. She wants to find Tessa. And part of her teaching Deck how to unlearn what his society has taught him, she starts telling him all of these different things. She's trying to teach him about sentimentality and teaching him about grief, how to deal with, his brother's sacrifice. She's teaching him about sensitivity. She even tells him this almost parable about, like, on Earth, where they come from. She tells Deck about wolves, like, these are alpha wolves, and, they're not necessarily the biggest or the strongest. They're not necessarily the best hunters. They're the ones who do the most protecting of the rest of the pack. That's what makes them the leaders. They're the best protector, not necessarily the best killer. As a way of saying to Deck, you might not be what your father is. You might not be what your brother is, but you don't have to be what they are, which is the message, right? The message is you don't measure up to your dad, so play a different game, right? So it's an interesting conversation that they're having because they're comparing, Thea is comparing Deck to another predator, which is, the wolf, and that wolf's hunting packs. So it should be okay for Yautja to hunt in packs, but Yautja society is completely different. So they eventually find Thea's legs. Thea she goes to her ship, she reattaches her legs, and then she betrays Deck by contacting Tessa and saying, hey, now we got the Yautja too. So they capture him, they capture Deck, and they captured the Callus because the Callus showed up eventually too, and they managed to capture it. Deck fought the Callus for a little while. His weapons were ineffective, and you find out why the Callus is so dangerous, not just because it's a large alien animal thing, but also because it regenerates. So whatever damage you do to it, it just comes right back. You cut the head off of it, head grows back. So they managed to capture it using some of the weapons from that they got from Deck. So Deck has been captured by the droids. The Yautja has been captured. Then we get a lot of Tessa and Thea, where now they're trying to figure out why Tessa is so sentimental towards, why Thea is so sentimental towards Deck. And Thea is trying to explain, why she feels this way. And she says, well, we were given emotions, like we're androids, but we were given emotions. And I understand Deck and I understand his situation, his story and all this. Tessa's just interested in the Yautja, and they're interested in his weapons. So Tessa eventually says, look, we were given emotions so that we know how to best exploit those emotions. I like the demons from Frieren, right? They mimic human emotions as, or human behaviors as a way of figuring out how to hunt. And in order to understand the creatures that are on the Kalisk's planet, they were given emotions. Thea and Tessa, they were the only two that were given emotions. The rest are just basically they're androids with human faces. Okay, so Thea frees Deck because she disagrees with what Tessa is trying to do to him, which is turn him into a science project. And Deck escapes the droids, but he turns around. He comes back to help Thea, who is now in the middle of some drama. I should say this at the same time. Tessa was, when they were defeated originally, Tessa made it back to the mother computer, and she gave an update to the mother computer about their failure. They again failed to capture the Kalisk. The mother computer says, look, if you continue to fail, I'm going to have to decommission the two of you because failure cannot continue to be allowed. So now you're seeing that it's the exact same thing. The father, in terms of seeing weakness in Deck and wanting him eliminated, the mother computer sees weakness in Tessa and Thea and wants to, if they continue to be disappointments, wants to destroy them. So in order to prove that she's not a disappointment, Tessa actually lies to the mother computer and says that they killed the Yautja, when in reality, Thea got the Yautja to escape. At this point, Deck is believed to be dead, but then he turns around and he comes back. He comes back to save Thea from Tessa. And this leads to him fighting all these androids, which is kind of cool. Would be nice if it was kind of cooler, but it wasn't too bad. In order to combat the Yautja, Tessa is inside of a Gundam. It looks like a damn like she's inside of a transformer. It's fucking cool, right? So she's inside of this machine. So it's a machine inside of a machine, by the way. And she's fighting Deck inside this machine. And this is the thing that they were using to fight the Kalisk, apparently. So they find out, and I should back up a little bit more. While Thea and Deck were out searching for the Kalisk, they found this little monkey thing. It's like a cute little animal sidekick thing. It's a Marvel gimmick, right? With a cute animal sidekick. And they found out that the cute animal sidekick is the child of the Kalisk. That's the big reveal, right? That's the secret to the Kalisk, is that this little animal thing is the child of it. So once they go to release the Kalisk, because now they realize, okay, killing the Kalisk is not right, because the Kalisk is the mother of our new buddy, our small buddy here. They free the Kalisk, or the fat Kalisk gets free somehow, and it chomps down on Gundam Tessa, almost completely kills her. In doing so, the Kalisk explodes from weapons or whatever that Tessa had stolen from the Yautja. So Tessa is essentially the final boss of, well, not the final boss. She's one of the sub bosses of the movie. So she survived being eaten while inside the Gundam. The Kalisk is destroyed, but it was not killed by Deck. Deck, once again, had gotten his ass kicked. He was laying down on the ground. Tessa is going to eliminate Thea because she's useless. She actually helped Deck, when not only escape, but helped him later on destroy the other droids or whatever. So Tessa's like, okay, look, we're done here. This is supposed to be an emotional part of the movie because this is where Thea realizes that Tessa is kind of cold-blooded, even though she's a machine, right? And Thea says, we're not sisters anymore. And before Tessa can kill her with the Yautja's weapons, Deck destroys Tessa. Okay. All right. So the Kalisk is dead. Tessa is gone. They take the airplane. They go back to the Yautja Prime home planet, where Deck confronts his father. He dumps Tessa's head at his father's feet and says, "I want my cloak." Basically, I was successful in my hunt. Give me my cloak. But the father had seen the Kalisk before, knows that this thing that he just dumped at his feet is not the Kalisk, and says, "What are you doing here?" Basically, you're full of shit. You're a disgrace. He orders the other two Yautja who are accompanying him, other two members of their clan, to kill him. Deck easily defeats these two Yautja, which shows that he wasn't completely and totally incompetent, and he learned something from his time on his own. And then of course, he goes to war with his father, and he defeats his father. The interesting bit of the movie is that he captures his father first. His father says, "Okay, you won. You managed to defeat me. You surprised me. So, hey, prepare to join the clan, I guess." And then Deck cuts his father's head off, rejecting his father's validation. And then out of the ship comes Thea and the small Kalisk creature. And as the movie is ending, Deck's mother is coming. So there's another warship coming in, and Deck is like, "Oh yeah, my mom's coming." And obviously, this is one of those the Yautja are a species where the mothers are bigger than the husband, the females are bigger than the males, essentially. So they're setting it up like there's going to be a part 2 to this. God, I hope not. All right, so that's the major plot beats of the movie. Like I said before, if this movie was about Deck honoring his brother and then seeking revenge on his father, I would be perfectly thumbs up with that. But that was not. They didn't leave it there. They added all of the emotional sentimentality stuff to it. They tried to humanize the Yautja, which I'm not a fan of people trying to humanize these monsters. He's an alien creature. All right. He is an alien creature from an alien culture. He does not need to be humanized. Um, I know why they did it, because it tells a better, more human story. This is not a story about a human being. This is a story about a Yautja. It's a story about an alien, right? So the therapy sessions that they have were probably the most brutal, because not because I'm just aggravated by therapy culture in general. This culture of you need to talk it out. You're going through grief, you're having this difficult time, go talk it out. It's good for your mental health. And then obviously the whole thing about the Yautja society being toxic masculinity, the focus on individualism, that the Yautja hunt alone. And she's saying, well, you don't have to hunt alone. You can get some help. And, wolves, they don't hunt by themselves. It doesn't have anything to do with fucking Yautja. He's not a wolf. Like, he is what he is. He should be a product of his environment, right? But the whole story is about rejecting your environment, rejecting your social structure that you were born into. And he eventually does reject that social structure. He never really becomes a full member of his clan. He did not complete his ritual. That's the weird thing about the whole fucking movie. That pissed me off. He didn't complete his ritual. He didn't defeat the Kalisk. He didn't come back to show his father, I did it. I did what you couldn't do. I surpassed you. Right? Which would have been a great masculine story, and would have been something that could have put his father in his place and gave his father a reason to validate him. But that's not what they wanted to tell. What they wanted to tell is that the old ways of doing things, all of the old men who uphold the old cultures should be destroyed. They should be thrown aside. They should be cast aside. That's the story that they wanted to tell. And that's the story that they did tell. So that was very frustrating for me. But again, that's the Hollywood agenda. You know, Hollywood has had this agenda always about burning the past. Obviously, when you deal with Marxists, they love doing that. They love the end of history kind of stuff. Everything is a blank slate. It's year zero. Mao did that, getting rid of the four olds, which was something that he did in China. And we see this. We see it in Star Wars, right? I didn't watch Star Wars, but I saw the clips of people who did love Star Wars, and they were very aggravated when they saw that there was a hatred for the past in the new Star Wars movies. Now there's a similar message being preached in the Predator movies about how the past needs to be replaced with a new way of doing things, a new version of events. And Deck needing to rely on others to survive. Because he didn't go through that entire thing alone. He never proved that he was a Yautja. He survived, and he learned a completely different lesson. He's basically not the creature that his brother wanted him to be. His brother wanted him to be a member of the clan. Go, prove me right. He didn't do that. Again, he did not kill the Kalisk. All right? So that's probably, and obviously this was clearly an issue of fathers being too hard on their sons, likewise mothers being too hard on their children. And so the parents are the problem. The parents have too high expectations for you. Parents need to learn how to lower their expectations and let you be you. You're not your dad. You're not your mom. You need to go out and be yourself, whatever that looks like, whatever that means. And there's an element of that I agree to. I don't think people are clones of their parents, nor do I think your parents should have complete control over your life to the point where they dictate your life in the future. It's that's the case as far as I'm concerned. So that's one of the things that I looked at. They want you to reject toxic masculinity, which they define as a rejection of sentimentality and individualism. They want you to reject your societal norms, that you need to change your perceptions and change and control your own life, which I don't have a problem with that. The movie was largely a warm blanket for a generation of men who hate and envy their fathers. Now, that's kind of strong, but there's no other way to see it. The father has no redeeming qualities. He only accepts Deck once he's cornered and can't possibly win. He doesn't see that the fact that Deck even left and came back as being a victory, considering, that wasn't even the case. And then when you watch the movie, you see Deck is weak, but he's not completely and totally incompetent, right? He's not as strong as Quay, right? He wasn't strong enough to defeat the Kalisk on his own, but he's not completely and totally incompetent. He's still a pretty good hunter. He's still, he still has heart. He's still, as vicious and crafty as a predator can be. They didn't weaken the character too much, but they changed a lot of the structures around him. So the Tessa-Thea relationship in the movie is an inverted version of the Deck-Quay relationship. Okay. And in both situations, there was a younger brother in Deck that was attached to his older brother, and the older brother sacrificed for him. On the other side, there was, I guess you could say, the younger sister in Thea expected Tessa to kind of reciprocate the feelings that she had, and she didn't get that same thing. Where Thea looked up to Tessa and was and very, connected to her. And there was a moment there, and this got me. This is where I let too much of that political shit get into my head, because as they were discussing it, I was like, somehow, some way, they decided to have a movie with no women and still managed to have lesbians, right? Because I'm thinking she's a robot. Why is she a lesbian? That's the whole thing I was thinking the entire time, until I believe during one of their therapy sessions, um, Dex says, "Is Tessa your sister?" And then Thea was like, "Yeah, I guess she is. I guess she is my sister." Um, it's 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 something, it was something in terms of that inversion of the relationship, where Quay never gave up on Deck, but Tessa eventually gave up on Thea. Thea was too sentimental. She was too understanding. She had crossed. She went beyond. She went above and beyond. So I give the movie a 6 to 7 out of 10. I think that's fair. Again, I think one of the biggest sins is they tried to humanize the Yautja. I think they spent too much time trying to humanize the Yautja. I also think that Deck not succeeding in the mission was a big, big problem. I mean, to me, that's a huge problem. All right. Because the central theme is that they don't believe in Deck, but he believes in himself. And he wasn't validated even internally. It's not like he defeated the Calisk and he lost any kind of proof to show to his father, which I think would have been a nice little monkey's paw element of it, where he defeated the Callus, but there's no corpse or anything that he can bring back to his dad, which would have been an interesting way of telling the story, where he goes back and says, I won, I killed the damn thing, but I have no corpse. And then your father says, well, you have no proof. Like, what are you talking about? Instead, he brought back a machine head. And I'm like, huh? Even I was confused off that. Like, why would you bring that back? Why would you? What use is that to him? But whatever. It wasn't a bad movie. I think a 7 out of 10 is about as high as you can go with this. It was good. It was not a complete waste of about 2 hours, but it obviously could have used less Thea talking for sure, and probably shortened the movie some. And a lot more action. It should have been more action. There's a whole lot of people who are, now shipping Thea and Deck, and that's so weird. Obviously, they took elements from Demon Slayer, with the whole her being carried on his back. That comes from Demon Slayer. I mean, obviously they were leaning into the anime nerd crowd. I mean, it was okay. It's not a dark, gritty, super violent movie. There's no human beings in the movie being decimated. Some of the Yautja are killed, but they're killed pretty quickly. All the creatures and things that Deck kills are, pretty easy to kill. Nobody's covered in blood and all that stuff. It's not gory and super violent. It's all right. It's a good movie if you like the franchise. There's certainly worse movies in the franchise. I don't think it was as good as Prey, and it certainly is not on par with the original Predator. It's way down the bottom. If the original Predator is like a 12 out of 10, this is like a 6 or 7 out of 10. But a lot of these Predator movies have gotten pretty fucking bad. You know, I like the franchise. I won't say I love it because I don't watch every single fucking movie that come out, but I do like the franchise. I tried to watch the movie Predators. I didn't even finish it. So so at least I finished this. I did get bored near the end because I don't find Tessa to be that interesting of a character, and I think they kind of lost me um, when Deck got captured. They kind of lost me right there because it reminded me a lot of like Devil May Cry at that point, where there was parts of the movie or parts of that show where Dante was taken out and then thrown back in later. I felt like they were doing the same thing to Deck, where this is a Deck story, and everybody else is just accoutrements to his story. But then they want to tell Thea's story, so they put Deck in this situation, and he's, it was weird, but it's not bad. It wasn't a bad movie by any means. It wasn't trash. It was not woke. But the Hollywood themes are there in terms of being anti-family, and being anti-male, essentially. Now, let's do the David Mamet questions. We're going to do the David Mamet question. Then we're going to get into this ridiculous video that I saw. That ought to be fun, right? All right, so one, what does your hero want? And this was the strong suit of the movie. Deck wants to prove himself to his father and the rest of his clan. He also wants revenge for the murder of his brother. In addition, he wants to honor his brother with a successful hunt and to earn his cloak. This is what the movie is about. This is the strong part of the movie. Deck's motivations are fantastic. All right. The second question, what stands in their way? This was also very good. Thea, Tessa, and an army of droids that are also hunting the Kalisk at the same time. They are standing in his way. Now, his inexperience is also standing in his way, right? He has never been on a hunt before. So this is his first hunt. And he is complicated by these other creatures that are competing with him for his same prey. And I like that element too. I just don't like how they did it because of the humanizing of his character. It wasn't like he treated these people as competition. And then, something happens that brings them together. They were together and then they became competition, and then that was short-lived, and then they were back together. I'm talking about him and Thea. What happens if they don't get it? So what happens if Deck doesn't succeed in his mission? Well, he gets killed by the Kalisk or the army of droids or whatever, which proves his father right that he was weak, and it dishonors his brother's sacrifice. So that's another really good reason for you to invest in the movie, because you don't want to see a character like Quay who sacrificed himself for his brother. You don't want to see that sacrifice go to waste, And for why now? Why is the movie happening right now within the canon? Well, because right now it's Deck, who is a young Yautja, not a member of his clan, and he wants to be. He's about to undergo his initiation ritual. I'm guessing you could say basically he's old enough now to go to his initiation ritual. And it's a struggle for him. But his father wants him killed. His father wants him culled from the clan. And that leads to all of the other issues that go into the story. So if you look at it from the David Mamet questions, it's a fantastic movie, which is why it's easily a 7. But the execution of it was somewhat problematic. I just felt like they definitely wanted to soften the Yautja too much. A little too much of that therapy shit. Too much of the droids probably. Really did not need at all this whole animal sidekick thing. We didn't need that at all. I would have preferred, again, if Deck would have destroyed the Kalisk and brought the head back to his dad. That would have been great. You could have even made the father even more worthless by him, even though he defeated the Kalisk. The father said, no, we was going to kill you. And that's like what we do. So like, we're going to kill you no matter whether you are successful or not. But Deck didn't succeed. So that took a whole lot out of out of me because I'm interested in his motivations. I'm interested in everything that he's doing. And then you took that away from me and gave me something else, which I didn't want, which is that he found a new family. He all of his old family is gone, except his mom. His mom is still there. But, the old found family trope, which I'm not interested in at all, to be quite honest. But we're going to listen to this guy, and he's going to talk about the new Predator movie. And in doing so, he's going to make a fool of himself. And I want to do a short conversation about this video. I believe it was a TikTok. A TikTok. Image that... All right, you ready? Let's go.
Has always been woke. Has always been woke, as you put it. The film is...
The Predator has always been woke. Let's play this again. I'm going to try to play as much of it as possible before I get back to it. This is a white man, by the way, and that's going to be really important into my response.
Predator has always been woke, as you put it. The film is meant to be a commentary on white America's delusion to power. America had a sense of invincibility due to never having lost a war, but that all changed after Vietnam, a war that they undeniably lost. This inflicted their egos. This is partly why in the 80s you started seeing a lot of American propaganda being injected into our movies. It was to repair this invincible image that we felt that we had lost. America was coping.
All right, let's back up. So America had an air of invincibility that was destroyed when they lost the Vietnam War. If you do any even minor Googling, you would know that the United States lost pretty much no battles in Vietnam. America lost the Vietnam War because they did not, despite all the men that they threw into Vietnam, despite all the money that they spent going into that goddamn war, they did not achieve the mission. They quit before the mission was completed. That's why they lost. But they did not lose any battles. It's not like the Americans went into Vietnam and got their asses kicked. No, they pounded the Vietnamese into dust. And then they pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded until the American citizens said, no more, stop. Stop doing this. Enough's enough. Whatever you were trying to do, enough's enough. Just pull out. And then eventually the government pulled out, finally. And the same thing pretty much happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, where you just go over there and it's a forever war. You lose track of what you're even doing over there. So the idea that Americans needed to cope, that's why you had American propaganda in the movies. There's a lot of these movies where there was always American propaganda in the movies. There was always, because people were patriotic. Americans are known to be pretty patriotic as is. I'm going to back up a little bit. We're going to play this again.
Lost. This inflicted their egos. This is partly why in the 80s you started seeing a lot of American propaganda being injected into our movies. It was to repair this invincible image that we felt that we had lost. America was coping. So in the late 80s, the director of Predator wanted to make it a satire movie that was openly mocking these kind of movies. That's why you get these over-the-top shots where we zoom in on their biceps. It's purposely being cartoonishly macho. Or like...
No. Nope. What they're doing is showing you peak human physicality. Because the point of Predator, and he's going to miss this, is that there is always a scarier, greater animal than humans. That's the point of Predator. You see these guys with their gigantic muscles and their gigantic guns, and they can't do anything against this creature that they have no idea existed prior to this. And it's hunting them down one at a time. And these aren't slouches. These guys are military guys with heavy guns and big muscles. And they pose no threat to this yautja. That's the point of Predator. Whatever the fuck he's talking about is something that came up in a classroom. No doubt you learned this in some gender studies class or some Marxist history class.
That's why you get these over-the-top shots where we zoom in on their biceps. It's purposely being cartoonishly macho. Or like how you have these scenes in the movie of these men who look like America's ideal of what a man should look like, holding these ridiculously large weapons, firing an absurd amount of rounds to another country's jungle and blowing it away and hitting absolutely nothing. This was meant to reflect how America poured an enormous amount of men, money, and firepower into Vietnam, and it was ultimately pointless.
That might be a good point. That might be a good point. It might be. But ultimately, the point of Predator is to show you peak male masculinity being subverted by a smarter, more technologically advanced creature that has the upper hand because it knows where you are. You have no idea where he is. And them firing into the jungle actually shows their paranoia. That they're hoping it to hit something. You know, they're scared by this point in time because this is, you know, they've killed several guys at this point of the movie by the time they start firing randomly into the jungle. And they figure if we unload into this jungle, we'll kill everything in there. So whether we can see it or not. And again, the Yautja have a cloak of invisibility. So they can't see it if they wanted to. So it doesn't really matter at this point, right?
Movie isn't celebrating masculinity. Instead, it's exposing toxic masculinity's limitations. America's idea of power in the 80s was to be big, show your strength, dominate, shoot first, and win with overwhelming force. This is why the Predator is their ultimate match, because he represents the opposite of this. He is patient. He hunts with precision. He isn't loud or showy. He has honor and code. This is why he gets each one of them separated, so he can fight them one-on-one. Notice.
Sure. You could also say he's a ninja because that's kind of how ninjas operated. He's an alien ninja monster, essentially. You know, if you knew anything about ninjas, ninjas are supposed to strike without being seen. And as a matter of fact, most predators would love to strike without being seen or recognized by the prey that they're going after. This is why lions are the color they are, so that they can blend in with the high grass. You know, this is why, well, other creatures. I had another one in my head, but it slipped away. Their bodies are made to hide what they are capable of, and for ninja, it was silence. You know, they learned how to. And if you play like video games and stuff, you know how ninjas operated. But they just took that element, the ninja style, and gave it to a highly technological monster, which was incredible. It was a great idea, and it did have that subversive element that he's talking about. The Yautja is still a big, strong creature though, because it's an alien. It doesn't have gigantic muscles, but the Yautja is not a weak creature. It's not like it's some frail, easily pounded creature that is, you know, subvertedly beating these guys. I remember, you know, the Yautja fought Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end of that movie and was kicking his ass pretty handily, you know, because he's a fucking alien, you know. So no, that's not likely yet. Okay.
Prey, when she's trapped in the bear trap, he could have killed her right there, but he chooses to walk away because that wouldn't be a fair fight. That's why the ending to the original Predator is so powerful. It's not until our hero drops America's tactics and adopts the Predator style of fighting, making it more of a fair fight, he's able to outsmart the Predator and win.
It's interesting he says America's style of fighting when this is how people fight wars. How Arnold Schwarzenegger fought at the end of Predator is how people fight wars. Now, he had to learn what he was up against. And that's when he started to adapt. But if he knew he was going to be in a war against a creature like that, he would have used those tactics from the beginning. The tactics that they were using, a lot of it came from them spiraling out of control. And that was the part of the movie that you were supposed to understand. It's five, or I think it was maybe even more than five alpha male characters that were not expecting to get ambushed by this creature. You know, well, not even 5 alpha male characters. One of them was like a regular sized guy. You know, but once Arnold realized what he's in for in this movie, he adapts. But that's actually how people fight wars, is how they play games. You have your own tactics first. You feel out your opponent, and then you adapt to what they do well, and you utilize it yourself. Arnold had to learn what the weaknesses of the Predator was. This wasn't a situation where they agreed to go to this battlefield and do this. No, the creature was hunting them, and they didn't know what it was. They're fighting a ghost. All right, that's you have to recontextualize the movie to get his understanding of it. They don't know what they're up against. Okay, once Arnold is the only one that learns what he's up against, so he's the one who has to adapt, and then eventually he does, and that's how he won. It has nothing to do with America's fighting style. You think they just went into Vietnam and just started dropping bombs and that was it? Overwhelming force. There was no attempts at recon. Nobody ever smudged mud on their faces. Nobody ever crept through the high grass or looked through some binoculars. What are you talking about? Like, this dude needs to be deported. I'm about deporting people now. This is that's my favorite thing of all time, is deporting people. It's better than killing them. I can tell you that much. Killing them ain't gonna teach them nothing. He needs to go learn what he's up against.
Fighting, making it more of a fair fight, he's able to outsmart the Predator and win. It isn't firepower and muscles that gets him the victory, it's his brain. Same with our lead protagonist in Prey. She doesn't win with strength, she wins by tricking him, by getting him to use his own fighting tactics against himself. Honestly, I think what's happened with a lot of you is that you saw the original Predator at a younger age when a lot of its meanings went over your head. And instead of growing up with the franchise, whenever you think about it or watch it, your mind is transported to how it made you feel then. Just because you weren't able to see the woke themes doesn't mean they were never.
No, you recontextualize the movie in order to come up with your woke theme. There was no gentleman's agreement to a battle in the jungle with an alien. No, this alien creature was, and it was a lot like how lions attack zebra, you know, or how a lion would attack an antelope. You don't know it's there. The Yautja had the advantage of knowing these guys were there. They didn't know he was there. So you have to recontextualize the movie to come to this guy's understanding, and even then, you have to basically hate the United States to come up with this idea. But these people are ridiculous, and they go through all of this because they want to shit on people who like the original movies, and they want to be like, well, this franchise was always woke. They do this every single time. The franchise is always woke. It's always been this way. You just didn't understand it. They do this with every single fucking thing, from He-Man to Power Rangers to Superman to Batman to Captain America. It was all woke from the beginning. You just didn't get it. It was always woke. Again, it's like, if they can't destroy the history, they'll co-opt it, right? Either they'll go and say, none of those things were any good anyway. They were all toxic and, yada, yada, yada. They were homophobic. They were transphobic. They were, anti-globalist, all this sort of crap, in order to create a year one story where, oh, it starts all over again here from when we got control of it. But since it's Hollywood, and Hollywood has been communist since like the 1910s, they can recontextualize everything as, Oh, this was always a Marxist subversive film. You just didn't understand it because you were too young. No, it wasn't. Okay. No, it wasn't. If you can read all of those deep meanings into it, but that wasn't the case. All right. The case was an alien creature began hunting these guys. And again, this was after they went and killed a whole bunch of people. So they showed how competent these guys were, how they ambushed guys who didn't know they were coming. You know, like that's the thing about the original Predator, is that it showed you that our GIs were the predators when they went into the jungle. They were watching these dudes, they were getting information, they were hiding out, and then they popped out on them, started killing a bunch of people in order to achieve their mission. What they didn't know was that they were being watched, they were being studied, and then the Yautja popped out on them, right? So again, you would have to recontextualize the movie and basically have this sort of his silly worldview in order for that movie to make sense. I didn't even know what that guy's name was, and I clicked it off without seeing what his name was. So if that guy ever comes across this, well, sorry I played your audio, buddy, but it is what it is. I didn't expect this to have a whole lot of comments or views because I know the movie is pretty new. But CP the Trucker says, well, let's go back to his first comment first. CP the Trucker says, "What's good, Slade? The first Predator is exactly why I don't think I'll be watching this one. This sounds like a Hallmark after school movie." Well, it's a Disney movie. It's all about learning shit, you know? But and that's what I think it weakens the movie, because I think they had a really, really, really strong foundation. They had a very strong foundation for the characters, for the motive of the characters. And then they watered it down with all of this sentimentality and all this other stuff, because they don't want to tell the story of Deck becoming a classically competent Yautja warrior who successfully completes his hunt and proves his father wrong and honors his brother and the rest of his clan, while shaming his father, because you can shame your dad. And I think this is a big problem. And I think this is the problem with that guy in this video. I think there is a generation specifically of white males. It's the same thing with black boys too, and I'll talk about it in a second. But I think there is a generation of white males specifically who hate and envy their fathers and grandfathers. When you listen to what that guy was saying, that guy hates his grandfather. He looked like he was too young to really hate, like his uncles or something. It has to be a situation with his father and his grandfather. Here's why I say that. Whenever a man is too accepting of a story or an idea that lambasts and destroys fatherhood and the society that created his father, he's fighting against, or he's finding solace in his own hatred and rejection of his father. Now, what I mean by these white dudes, they read books all day about guys like, or they'll read or see TV shows about the great men of history. A lot of these white guys like Napoleon, guys like James Madison, or Thomas Jefferson, or George Washington. They'll see a lot of modern great men, but a lot of it is historical. Guys from, the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, you know, and they realize that'll never be me. I can never surpass my father. I'm always going to be in my father's shadow. I'll never, found a country. I'll never go on the great adventure like Christopher Columbus. and all the Spaniards and the Dutch and the Vikings that you read about in books today. That'll never be my life. I'll never, fight the great war, win the great battle, get the girl. That'll never be my life. So they reject it. And a lot of generations since Vietnam has had that sort of attitude. And you see it with a lot of black boys too, a lot of black men. Is why a lot of black people are stuck in the 70s or stuck in the 60s. They want to be H. Rap Brown or talk like they're Martin Luther King, or they want to quote Malcolm X all the time, because that was to them the height of black masculinity. They want to mirror that. And then you'll have these male feminists who know that can never be them. They can never be a Malcolm X. They can never be a Huey Newton. So they'll try to tear those people down. And and it's a weird thing, because I know I go after Martin Luther King and Huey Newton, all these people a lot too, but I criticize mostly their ideas. I don't envy the life that they lived. I think me being born in the 80s was great, right? Because I didn't have to deal with the water hoses and the Jim Crow laws and all that kind of stuff. I was born at just the right fucking time. There's no world wars for me to fight. And guess what? I don't look to fight any wars. But there are people who wish that they do, because their life has no meaning. Right? And this was the one thing about the military service, is that it puts young men, it gives them a focus. And yes, war is hell, war is bullshit. But it gives you a focus, and it gives you an appreciation for life and an appreciation for your country. When it became a completely voluntary military, a lot of that was lost. But I think now we have an entire generation of men who are rejecting their fathers because they're jealous. And by fathers, I don't necessarily mean directly the man who impregnated a woman and then they were the offspring. I mean mostly their grandfathers. I mean their ancestors. I mean males who they could have been related to or might be related to, who did great things. They have a distinct hatred of them. And I think a lot of that comes from jealousy. You were never any good anyway. You were just a colonizer. You were just a rapist. You're just yada, yada, yada. A homophobe, transphobe. You hate it. You're a bigot. It's weird. But I think that's where this stuff comes from. I think they feel inadequate. I think they feel impotent, because comparison is the thief of joy. And a lot of people, especially young people, they compare themselves to their parents. You see it economically all the time. They'll say this generation is more socialist than the previous generations because they're comparing themselves to their parents. They're having children later. They're buying their first home later. They are making less in terms of income. They're being laid off more. They're starting their careers later. They're jumping from job to job more than their parents ever did. And that builds a sense of inadequacy. And quite often, if you still have living parents, I know I do, your parents will compare you to them. Like my grandfather, he worked in a factory. He barely had any education at all, but he was able to hold a job, and he had no problems. If you were saying you were quitting your job or something like that, with looking at you with complete and utter disgust. I worked the same job for 70 years or 50 years or whatever. You quitting after a couple of years? What's wrong with you? It's a different world, granddad. But if you are made to feel less than by your grandfather, by your fathers, your uncles, your big brothers, because you didn't achieve a damn thing. Meanwhile, when they were 40, like if you go back in history, you would see a guy like James Madison wrote the Constitution, wrote the Federalist Papers, did a whole bunch of shit before he was 40 years old. You see that stuff a lot. Like there were young guys creating multi-million-dollar companies in their 30s, and the next generation looks at that and be like, my God, why aren't we doing anything like that? And that envy starts to set in, and there's always something like, and it was, I always say this is one of my favorite parts of that movie, Dead Presidents, is at the very end where the judge says that he fought in World War II, a real war, by the way, and that slaps every Vietnam vet in the face, because these are Vietnam vets that we have been following through the movie, and they're coming home from the war. There's no jobs for them. There's no opportunities, and they got PTSD, and people hate them. They're baby killers and all that kind of shit. But they're also being judged by the older generation, and there's hatred there. There's envy there, because the World War II generation were the last generation of American heroes that were soldiers. That's it. Every generation since then, if you fought in Desert Storm, if you fought in Korea, if you fought in Afghanistan or Iraq, you were not considered a hero. Again, the real victory of the Vietnam War was the victory for the left, because they were the ones calling the soldiers baby killers and spitting on them, and they had completely degraded military service. So nobody saw it as being in high regard since then. And every war that we have fought since World War II has been an American offensive war. We trying to, do some sort of world policing, punish dictators or overthrow communist governments or whatever the fuck, regime change wars and all this kind of stuff. That stuff is not make people view you as a hero. You're viewed as an aggressor. And so people look back at a lot of these older men and say, you put your life on the line, they saw you as a hero. I'll put my life on the line, they called me a baby killer and they spit at me. And that's from people who were soldiers. So imagine if you didn't even put your life on the line for anything. You've never done a damn thing for anybody. You just grew up in the fucking suburbs, never really achieved a fucking thing. You got your boring 9-to-5 job. You got your boring career. You went to boring ass college. You got your boring ass wife with your boring ass kids. You've never done anything spectacular in your entire goddamn life. But you feel like you should be lionized like the guys who did stuff. This is where you get male feminism from. I think I really believe a lot of male feminism is guys who are searching for validation through women. That is, I fully believe that. I don't know if I can fully articulate it. I don't know if I can prove it with, facts and figures, but I believe that fucking shit right there. I believe that a lot of male feminists, they feel inadequate when they're compared to other men, because comparison is the thief of joy. If they were not comparing themselves to other men, they probably would be just fine. But because they do, they easily accept that men run society. Masculinity is toxic. All this other garbage that they believe. They swallow this stuff wholesale because it gives them a good excuse to not succeed as a man. Why? You don't have to have any of this stuff. Like none of this stuff is what makes you a man. But they view economic success, sexual conquests, all these sorts of things, because a lot of this stuff they grew up, listening to rap music or seeing TV shows or whatever, and they think this is what men are supposed to be about. And if they're not doing the same thing, they feel inadequate. They feel judged. I'm not getting as laid as much as the college quarterback. I must be less of a man than he is. You're a different man than he is. You're not less than a man. You know, you make different decisions. People, like part of the reason why the high school quarterback can get laid so much is because he's an athlete, and athletes tend to be popular. And doesn't really have. He might be handsome, he might not be. Who knows? But a lot of it is due to his status. And what happens is, if people cannot achieve that status, they begin to degrade that status. And they do it all the time. This is one of those things that Jordan Peterson talked about a lot, where he talked about games. And I forgot what psychologist he was quoting, but he starts saying, like, society works well, the Western society, because there are so many different hierarchies. Hierarchies exist, but there are so many now that men don't feel the need to, attack and kill each other over class issues and stuff like this, because there's hierarchies at work, but there's also hierarchies at play. You might not be the most handsome, debonair, James Bond level guy, but you can get women. You got a wife. There is a society that allows for you, a path for you to achieve certain elements. We don't allow polygamy, so we don't allow the king to have 10 wives while you have none. Right now, that society is starting to change as we allow guys to have 18 baby mamas, while there's guys out here who can't get a girlfriend at all. But generally speaking, our society is set up for one man, one woman. So the option for you as a regular guy is you can always go out there and get a wife. Now, housing and stuff like that, the workplace, that stuff starting to change too. And a lot of the young guys, they're not wrong in being very, very mad about a lot of the opportunities that are not there anymore for them. They're not wrong to be upset about that, but they're blaming their fathers for this. They're angry at the father instead of being mad at the government, which created the problem in the first place. They're mad at their dads because their dads are the ones who are comparing themselves to them. That's a big problem. And I think I'm almost willing to put money on it. If you sat down like Jesse Lee Peterson and asked this guy, have you forgiven your father? He'll probably say, well, there's no reason for me to do that. And you have to drill and drill and drill. And eventually you'll probably have some stupid ass conversation he had when he was 15 or something like that, where his dad made him feel bad. And he's been harboring bitterness about it ever since. Back to the comment section. So no one was saying they don't have time to bleed. No, there was no macho one-liners. They were in there talking about sentimentality, and she was teaching him about grief. She's a fucking android too. That pissed me off. CP the Trucker said the chess match with Predator and Dutch was iconic. Both respected each other. Yeah, I mean, like, once you realize the danger that you're in, your tactics have changed, and you earn a more respect for your opponent. WG Field says you have the left celebrating the movie for rejecting toxic masculinity, and you have the right crying about it being an interracial dating dog whistle. You're talking about this movie? She's a fucking robot. Like, what do you mean by? I don't know. They were friends more than anything, I guess. WG Phil says they'll have to accept sailing to Asia to help with brides. Going to Uzbekistan to find one unpure woman in the West. Not likely, though. CP the Trucker says, Slade, I think you're also describing the dynamic, at least to a small degree, between Shane and Vince. I believe that is the issue. I think that was one of the issues between Shane and Vince, sure. I think there's a lot of Shane McMahons out there. I think there are. Their dads did great things. May not have been the best people, but they did great things. And you grew up in his shadow. You might try to do great things on your own, but you can't. And the more people compare you to your dad, the more inadequate you feel. And, that's the tough thing about growing up with money. Like, a lot of people give people who have money, if you have a rich dad or something like that, they're like, oh man, you must have been blessed. You grew up, you got whatever you wanted, did whatever you wanted. It's like, yeah, but you don't see the really high expectations that other people put on you. And despite the fact that we know more about this stuff today, especially from a psychological perspective, we know way more about it today than we used to. People still have those high expectations for their children. You know, I mean, look at what happened with LeBron James' son. You know, LeBron James had to stay in the league to make sure his son made it to the NBA because that was what LeBron James' expectation. Just think about what would have happened if Bronny had not made it to the league. Look at what happened with Deion Sanders' son, right? Deion Sanders' son didn't get drafted in the first round. Deion and everybody else was crying because his expectations were that his son was great, right? He's my son. Like, that don't mean anything. He ain't you. Shador Sanders is not Deion Sanders. But in Deion Sanders' mind, his son is going to be this great player and yada, yada, yada. The expectations is way up here. Now, both Bronny and Shador Sanders, they got lucky. They had dads who are still tapped into the league and can carry and hold their hand through the league. Other people don't have that. Other people's dads are just sitting in the stands hoping that their son make it. Even if dad did play in the NBA, Michael Jordan's son, I believe, played basketball, but he didn't make it. I mean, it happens. But people put expectations upon you, and that would suck. That sucks. Martin Sheen was cold in that verdict. Yeah, he was crazy. Like, that blew my wig off. That was why Pat Tillman joined the military, for the great hero story. WG Phil says, do you think Shane has forgiven Vince knowing he screwed Stephanie and Paul over temporarily? I would think that at his age, Shane would have understood that it was never going to be him. It was kind of Stephanie or nothing. I hope so, because Shane is in his 50s. So I hope he's forgiven him. Maybe not forgiving him for embarrassing the family. Shane's got children in college right now, and the grandfather's being called a sex trafficker. I would be mad about that. I would be very upset about that. But there's a lot of young people out there that have nothing but contempt for their parents and their grandparents. And it comes out in the most mysterious and bizarre ways. And I think number one, when it comes to that rejection, is for them joining these Marxist organizations. They grow up with such immense wealth that they don't appreciate it. And they feel guilt that other people didn't. And this leads to them pushing Marxism on people. People like Carlos Maza, Hassan Piker, Ezra Klein, Emma Vigeland. Again and again, you see Kim Kardashian. Again and again, you see these people grew up rich, very well-off parents, and they find themselves in the mix of left-wing shit because it gives them a warm blanket that, oh yeah, I grew up rich, but it wasn't my fault. It was my parents. I know you hate the rich, but you shouldn't hate me. I'm trying to help. No, you shouldn't hate people because they're rich. It's stupid. It's stupid. CP the trucker says, sorry, Slade, I meant to say that Pat Tillman joined the military special forces because he felt like he hadn't done anything, despite being playing top NFL football. Oh, I didn't know that. That's crazy. But there's a lot of people who do that. There's a lot of people my age. Hell, I have days where I feel that way. Sometimes I'm sitting especially if I'm at work and I haven't done anything in a couple of hours. I'll be like, man, I'm 40 years old. I have no children. I don't own my own home yet. I have those thoughts too, you know, because again, you're conditioned to think this is how it works when you're an adult. You should have been preparing for this since you turned 15 or 16. That one day you're going to be a father and you're going to, own your own home and have a mortgage and all this kind of stuff. But I eventually just put life in its appropriate perspective. I do know people who have children, um, and it's great. It's great for them. It just haven't happened for me yet. I don't know anybody who just bought. I know people who rent a house. They don't own it. They rent it, and it hasn't happened for me yet. Like there are some things that I just put yet on the end, and that keeps you from being depressed. Yeah, it keeps you from being depressed. It keeps you from being angry. But I also am not in a situation where I'm jealous of my father or my grandfather. You know, because again, my granddad was a man who worked in a factory his whole life. He had a very, very, very limited education. I have way more education than my grandfather had. I'm not going to work nearly as long as he did, especially in one place. Am I going to have five children in one house? Probably not. By the time he was my age, he had all his children, and my dad was the second of five, if I remember correctly. It's like how many aunties I got? Yeah, second of five. And I don't compare myself to him. I never met my mother's father. Her birth father. I think he died when she was young. The guy who raised her, who is technically my grandfather, um, he died many, many years ago. But I never compared myself to him either. He was another guy that worked in the plants. I worked in the plant. It's like one of those things that you just do when you live in Michigan. Just have a have a go and walk around and see how many people have worked in a GM, a Chrysler, or whatever kind of plant. You work for Lear or something like that. It's just people work in plants around here. It wasn't for me. And so I knew right then and there that that wasn't for me. So I wasn't jealous of my grandfather. I never had any inclination about going into the military. Me and my dad never had that conversation. My dad was a Marine. I never talked about him going into the military. Earlier this year was the first time he had expressed any sort of disappointment that me or none of my brothers went into the military. It was the first time he had ever said anything. And he kind of grumbled about it, where he was like, I always thought one of you guys would go into the military and, just like I did. I'm like, well, shit, you ain't say anything. like I still wouldn't have done it. But there was a time there when I was 18, 19, 20, and I was floating through life and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I still, shit, I might have been 25 and still didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a little bit more direction by that point in time, though. But when I was younger and I had dropped out of high school when I was like 14, 15 years old, there was time there for him, if he really wanted me to get into the Marines, could have said, hey, look, why don't you go into the Army or something? Well, I might have considered it, He never said anything. He waited till I'm fucking 40 to be like, hey, my youngest brother is 35. Like there's no way nobody's going into the fucking military, Dad. You can forget it. They're not going to take us anywhere. We're old fucking guys. So but that was the first time he had ever mentioned it. And he didn't say it like, you guys weren't as good as I am, because he didn't even fight in Korea. He went to Korea. He didn't fight. He didn't kill anybody. He was a support staff over there. But that was the first time he had ever even mentioned it. And I know that's not the case for other people who their dads had these huge, wonderful ideas for them, and they fell short. uh, CP the trucker thought I was a vet. Yeah, right. There was no chance in hell of that. There was no chance in hell. I was 300 pounds at 19. I might have gone, but I probably wouldn't have made it. I probably wouldn't have made it very far. The crazy thing is when I had friends who went into the military. You know, I had a friend named James. He joined the Marine Corps when he was like 19 or 20. You know, it was a weird thing. Like I never even thought my dad wanted me to, because sometimes you would have a guy who went to the military and he wouldn't want that for his children. You know, and usually those guys saw battle. You know, they saw people get hurt and shit. So they're like, no, we don't want that for my side. But my dad was like, I would have thought one of you guys would have gone into it. I'm like, everybody looking at him like, what the fuck you talking about? Man, please. Man, hell no. You 20 some odd years too late on that one. And then think about that. If I would have enlisted, I'd have been in George Bush's fucking military. I'd have been in Afghanistan. Fuck that. You know? No. They sent my ass to Iraq or something. No way. No. No. Mm-mm. 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 That was bad. And I was just getting woke on that stuff too, though, by the way. So I definitely wasn't going into the military. That's because I was just starting to learn, like not learning how to read, but just starting to really like pick up on the political environment and how that stuff worked in my late teens, early 20s. And I'm most certainly by, see, I turned 16 in 2000. So that means I was 20 in 2004. And yeah, there's no way in hell I would have done that. There's no way in hell I would have done. I would gone into the military right after 9/11. No way. Mm-mm. It wasn't safe to go into the military to fight today. You know, sometimes I think about it because I think about things all the time. You know, I have like one of those overactive imaginations where sometimes I put myself in situations like, what if I would have made this decision? What would have happened? You know, like sometimes I think about like right before I quit high school, I'll say like, what if I'd have graduated from high school? When they put me in VOTEC classes and they put me in that boring ass uh car parts class where they said, oh, you're gonna teach you how to take apart an engine. Oh my god, I don't want to take apart an engine. I want to go play Final Fantasy. So that's what I did. Fuck this. I left. Went home and played Madden or something. Like I don't got time for this shit. But what if I took a class that I was actually interested in? You know, what if I took one of those VOTEC classes I was actually interested in? What if when I went to Job Corps, I went to Job Corps. I wanted to be an electrician, and it had closed the electrical shop just before that. They had closed that program, so I had to go into another program that featured carpentry, roofing, um, glazing, and there was some electrical. It was the only thing that had like an electrical element to it, and I was bored out of my mind. I didn't want to do that. I did it because you have to do a trade. I wasn't interested. I tried it. I didn't like it. I still know some of the plumbing tricks. So I do a little plumbing for my mom and stuff like that, like unclogging her drain and changing some of the pipes and stuff. Like I learned that kind of shit. So I can do like toxic masculine stuff around the house. Like I know my way around a pair of pliers. But there's no I had no interest in being a carpenter, no interest in being a plumber. It was just something I could do because I do think that men should know how to do things with their hands. That's one toxic masculine thing I have. I do think, I'm not saying everybody needs to know how to do everything, but you need to know how to do something, because if you rely too much on other people, you're going to spend a whole lot of money. So I learned how to take care of some basic plumbing things myself. And I remember my mom's toilet, not the toilet, her shower was plugged, and me and my uncle unplugged it. So I did most of the fucking work. My uncle's lazy, but yeah, that was fine. But Uh, like I know how to, fix a hole in the wall. I know how to, change an electrical outlet. I did some light electrical work when my grandma was alive, changing her fixtures. I hadn't done that stuff. My grandma's been dead for so long. I don't know if I know how to do that stuff anymore. But I know how to do shit like that because I think you need to learn something around the house, not just how to cut the fucking grass. Of course, I know how to paint. Painting is pretty easy. It's not. I'm not saying like it's not hard work and it's not worth talking about. But painting is pretty fucking easy. But I did that too. WG Phil says, but you could have been able to see WWE for Tribute to the Troops every Christmas season. Yeah, they also could have blown my fucking legs off. I'm not. What's the risk? I go to Iraq and fucking Undertaker shows up and that's great. But then, some bullshit happens and some girl gets raped in a camp somewhere. Like, I don't know, I want no part of that. No. I would have been another notch on Dick Cheney's belt. Ugh, would have been a disaster, right? Would have been a fucking disaster. Yeah, so I think a lot of people they're prisoners of their parents, and I do think that sometimes that's a problem when parents are living vicariously through their children. I talked about Deion Sanders earlier. I think he's living vicariously through his sons. His sons are, probably mediocre football players, but he thinks that they're great because he's great, and he wants them to have this great career too. And he's gonna continue to float around, and in some ways, he's sabotaging them, and because his expectations are so high. Sometimes you need to increase expectations on people, and they will meet them. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people, especially black boys. If you raise expectations for them, they will meet them. But if their expectations are too high, they will hate you for it. If it's like, hey, when I was 25, I had my first $1 million. What are you gonna do? Well, shit, I'm, not have $1 million at 25. It's like you see it a lot with these children of rappers. The rappers, they're not as good as their dad, and people are not shy about telling them that. They'll say, "Oh yeah, you look just like him," but do I rap like him? You look just like him. What was it like growing up with Jadakiss as your daddy? It's not that he's bad or anything like that. It's just he's not Jadakiss, and there's that. And sometimes that's enough to make people flip their trigger. And but when your dad actually does something great, when your people or your tribe or whatever does something great, I don't necessarily have a problem with people feeling um feeling good about it. You should feel good about positive history, but you also have to realize that being proud about collective history when you've done nothing to add to that legacy is stupid. That's one of the reasons why I don't really respect a lot of the Nick Fuentes types. They talk about the greatness of the West and how they need to protect the United States. They're not doing anything to help the country. You do fuck all nothing to help this country. At least the black grifter activist who is perpetually living in 1962. He's trying to live the lifestyle of the ever pained black grifter activist of 1962. And that's too bad, dog. I don't know what else to say, but a lot of people, they have a lot of opinions. They don't have a lot of experience, and they have I hate want to use this word. They have unchecked trauma. CP the trucker just followed me on X. I appreciate it, big dog. Thank you very much. More people should follow me on on X/Twitter. It's right there on the screen at MongoSlade8. Also, send money via Cash App if you can. I appreciate that very much. I did have a subscribe star. I stopped pushing it years ago, actually, because I forgot the password to it. But I'm gonna try to, maybe in 2026, I'm gonna push subscribe star a lot more. I got to build my finances back up. And my shit was down bad. And I was actually thinking about putting some of the live streams behind the paywall. But I was also thinking about cutting live streams completely anyway. But I'm just, just things running through my mind because I was having such a tough time. And we'll see what happens in the future. There's going to be some kind of change in 26. I may do more live streams next year. Degenerate Sharingan said Nick Fuentes is in the same boat as the We Was Kings type pro blacks. That's exactly the problem. And that's why I don't take him seriously. Like he the only reason people are listening to him is because he's vulgar, right? He does the Jew stuff and he says the N-word and people think it's edgy and that's why they're listening to him. He knows some stuff about politics and he knows a little bit about history. He's not a complete idiot. But he is a We Was Kings white boy, and that's pretty much it. I can write him off just like I write off a lot of the other idiots. He has a lot of I hate to put it, but it fits. He reminds me a lot of Richard Spencer, Andrew Anglin, and a lot of those other boys that we listened to back in the day before this kind of talk made it into the I guess you could say mainstream. There was a lot of those white supremacists, talking points and a lot of playing around with the Jewish question and all that edgy shit. He giggles a lot more than they do, though. And I guess that kind of disarms people. And he also teeter-totters around the whole white supremacy thing where he just doesn't say, I'm a white supremacist, because then that kind of outs him too much. But he'll say things that are very much racist and then don't back down from it. And I have respect for that. Like, if you're going to be a racist, don't back down from it. But when you have never achieved anything, you got two options. One, you despise what has already been achieved, or two, you cling to it. And Nick Fuentes and a lot of people are like that. They cling to history. Look at what my race has done. It's like, okay, if they were building a wall of great white men of history, would your name be on it? No, you just be a motherfucker staring at the wall. That's I wouldn't be too concerned with that. And I think that's collectivist thinking. And that's also why I think ultimately Nick Fuentes is going to end up being a Democrat because he's a collectivist. And a lot of these people who are collectivists, they end up being Democrats in the end. Because Richard Spencer is a Democrat. He's a white supremacist. He has a pretty big following too. He has a Ukraine flag. Last time I saw him popped up on my damn Twitter account, he had a Ukraine flag next to his name. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. He's just all in on the left now. He's all in. But that's because, Ukraine was known to have Nazis in it. And that explains it all right there, right? The Nazi Ukrainians versus the crazy fucking Russians. Nick pretending to be white when he's Hispanic, not even European Spanish. Well, he's certainly gutter, some kind of gutter white guy. I mean, he's from Chicago, which means he's more than likely mixed with something. He's more than likely mixed with something. But that's the humorous thing, is like, even all of the white supremacists and the white nationalists now aren't pure white people anymore. I couldn't have imagined Nick Fuentes showing up to a real Klan rally in like the 1920s or something with the name Fuentes, and they would have taken him seriously. He might not have gotten the rope, but they might have turned him away at the door, like, "Nah, you some kind of Mexican or something like that. Get out of here. You're not American at all with a name like Fuentes. You can forget it." he might have pulled a Jew move, like whatever his middle name is. He might be like, oh yeah, my name is Nicholas James. You said they still have Nazis in Ukraine. Ever heard the Azov Battalion? Well, I think those might have been the guys I seen then. Those might have been the guys I saw because I knew like there was some Nazi related shit going on in Ukraine, and a lot of white nationalists were adopting Ukraine. So I'm not surprised at all when I saw Richard Spencer with the Ukrainian flag. I was like, oh, he blends in perfectly with the left. He's a collectivist. I think he's a socialist too. So like that says it all. The weird thing about Nick Fuentes is that I don't know what his ideas are. Like I don't know anything about like his ideas on most policies. Everything I see about him is basically race and Jew stuff, you know? So it's hard for me to take him seriously. I don't even think Nick Fuentes is even a conservative, really. You know? I question the same thing when it comes to Tucker Carlson, where I question whether they're even conservatives. They're certainly right wing, but I don't know if you could even call them conservatives. You know? I know people have said they're not MAGA. Well, that part is obvious. You know, they were kind of, and I think that's why we see this big conservative civil war thing people keep talking about. It's because Trump can't run anymore. So now everybody's grasping to see who's going to be next. And everybody wants to be the guy to push the next guy forward. Fuentes is attacking JD Vance because JD Vance is apparently he sees JD Vance as being the guy that's going to be up next. So JD Vance is in a mixed relationship, and Nick Fuentes is like, no, he's too close to the globalists and immigrants and stuff. No way. But that's what they're fighting over. And this is the same thing that happened when Obama won. Obama had such popularity that when he finally got to the peak and he couldn't run anymore, the party splintered into 1,000 pieces as everybody fought over the scraps of what's going to be Obama's legacy, who is Obama going to push forward. Everybody thought it should be them or their guy, and everybody thought, oh, Bernie Sanders got a chance, but then the party got behind Hillary, and that fucked everything up. I think the same thing is about to happen to the Republicans. Trump can't run anymore. Trump really can't even help people anymore in terms of politics. There has to be a new guy. And so you see a lot of these podcasters and these guys, the Crowders and the Ben Shapiros, they're trying to figure it out. And they're going after each other because each one wants to be the one that shapes the next guy to take the baton in the Republican Party. But since Trump is a very unique case because Trump is also not a conservative, Trump was a New York Democrat for most of his fucking life. And then in like 2008 or 9, he became a Republican. So WG Field says, I wish people talk more about Nick having child FF members getting groomed by a black Islamic Sammy Davis Jr. looking dude. I don't know enough about Nick Fuentes. I just know I don't like what I see. And the crazy thing is I've been looking at Nick Fuentes clips for years. I've listened to him debate people. I've listened to him talk to people, and I still don't feel like I know a lot about him. And I think mostly because people are obsessed with his extreme views and his extreme positions. And so they want to talk to him constantly about his love of the Jews or the weird stuff he says about Hitler or the weird stuff he says about Stalin. They don't want to talk to him about, oh, hey, how do we fix our housing policy? Because that is where he could really be dangerous. As long as he's talking about how much he loves how Hitler is cool and Stalin was cool, it's like, all right, he's just a chaos agent. He don't give a fuck about nothing. If he actually wanted to be dangerous, he would talk about serious stuff. And right now, he's not talking about anything serious. At least I don't hear him talking about anything serious. All this collectivist shit, it just creates a white collective, white tribal identity. And he's trying to utilize that to combat people's black or now Muslim, because that's becoming a big problem in the United States, tribal identities. You see it in Minnesota, you see it here in Michigan with the Dearborn and Hamtramck. That's becoming a big issue. And if Nick Fuentes wanted to be helpful, that's one of the issues he should be talking about is, hey, you shouldn't be running for president or governor of a state if you're not going to do something about these fucking Muslims who are, now in New York, they're praying in the streets. Now, since Mamdani won, they're praying in the street. That they're trying to take over. Like there's a whole lot of stuff that is worth talking about that might be tribal, but it's important. Like I'm not a collectivist, but I'm not an idiot either, and I definitely think that the Mamdani stuff activated a whole lot of Muslims around the country in terms of thinking like we're normal now, like we can drop the mask to a degree with all the taqiyya and all the lying and shit that they've been doing, politically. They don't have to do as much anymore because being a Muslim is not an automatic, eliminator anymore. But I have a big problem with like Rashida Tlaib here in Michigan. She talks more about Palestine than she talks about anything. Like that's becoming a big, big goddamn problem. It's not, and I don't need to unite, quote unquote, with Nick Fuentes to say that he's fucking right about people who have dual loyalties in our government. And he wants to focus on Israel. I want to focus on all of it. And I also want to talk about how our media is being funded by foreign agents. So I certainly want to talk about Tucker Carlson taking money from the Qataris when Tim Pool and all those guys got busted taking money from the Russians, even though they claim they didn't know anything about it, which I tend to agree. I'll give them a break on that. You didn't know that the Russians were paying you. But now that we know that they're doing that, why are we not looking at people who say bizarre things on camera? I mean, again, Tucker Carlson has said some really, really weird shit. He's done a whole lot of weird shit. He talked to Nick Fuentes and all that stuff. He recently put on a guy who denied the genocide of Christians in Nigeria. 200 Christians killed at one time. And I'm talking, I think over 100,000 in the last several years. And Tucker Carlson is like, there's no genocide in Nigeria. Why do you even care? Why do we care? They're like, well, I guarantee you the Muslims give a fuck when there's Muslims being killed somewhere. So why wouldn't a Christian care about Christians being killed overseas? Like, I'm not saying we should go to war over it. I'm not saying that. But we should certainly be having conversations about that, right? You would care about your brothers and sisters in Christ, right? Seems weird that you don't. Very, very bizarre. But I question the motives of a lot of people. I think Candace Owens has gone overboard. Obviously, Ben Shapiro is an Israel first guy, so I question him. And I think that's a big problem that we have on this side is that if you're America first as a right winger now, a lot of that means being a white supremacist. You're against interracial marriages and you want to deport everybody, even some of the people who are here legally. You want to deport them. I'm all for deporting people. I think you should find all the people who shouldn't be here. I don't care if it's 100 million of them and send them back to their country of origin. And some of the people I think should be deported are American citizens. I think we should exile some American citizens, So, but that seems to be what that means. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But the big problem here is these guys are floundering because they don't know who they want the next guy to be. DeSantis should have waited when he ran against Trump. That was a mistake. He should have waited. He would have been the guy if he had waited. Now I'm not sure he can beat JD Vance. JD Vance, if he were to get in this seat, this guy has an Indian wife. And that's going to be a big problem for the Fuentes crowd. So that means that the next guy is going to have to be basically a fucking white nationalist, or Nick Fuentes is going to turn his crowd Democrat, which is, I'm almost certain is what's going to happen. He did it last time. He basically started saying that he wanted his folks to support Kamala Harris. Okay, I mean we're not idiots here. All right, so that's how collectivists roll, brother. It's weird to me though that you want other people to be so white that they're racist, but if they're not, well, go vote for the Indian woman. That's stupid. Because then you get 0% of what you want, and you get more of what you don't want. And that's the weird thing about the binary system of politics is either you galvanize around a guy like Trump, who is going to do shit that I don't like tariffs, or I don't like how the ICE raids are being done. Like, I don't like the idea of these people fighting folks in the street because somebody's going to get hurt for sure. Also, it's bad PR. They got this fake woke preacher in Chicago who got pepper balls sprayed in his face. He's a fake woke preacher. Fuck him. But it's bad PR. They could run commercials off of that kind of stuff. What they should just be doing is laying traps and snatching people up off the street. I know that these governments are making it difficult. That's why it's so violent. That's why it looks so bad, because places like Washington and California and Oregon and Illinois and now New York and other places, they're sanctuary states. So they're not doing things like turning over how many illegal immigrants have driver's licenses. They're not turning over how many of these illegal immigrants have social security cards or social security numbers. Fake social security numbers. They're not born here, so they probably stole somebody's social security number. They were giving them fake real IDs with no names on them, which is sick. Like, how did you even get away with that? The snap shutdown really opened up a big ball game there too, because now they're figuring out how many illegal immigrants are laying around on the taxpayer dime collecting food stamps. So like all of this stuff is doing nothing but pissing people off. And these would have been good ways to get rid of people, to lay these traps and let these illegal immigrants come to the government looking for the restarting of their food stamps and say, hey, you ain't supposed to be here, snatch them, throw them, and take them out of here. But now it has to be, 3 days of fighting to deport 15 people. Like, that's bad PR. You're not getting anything out of it, except for tons and tons and tons of left-wing media pumping shit into the universe about how you're the Gestapo and all that other bullshit. But I'm not a big fan of everything Trump does. Trump would not have been my first candidate if I could have found somebody that was closer to my politics who could have won. But I got to take the bitter with the sweet. Trump now talking about giving away money again. Like, what the fuck is this guy doing? He's talking about 50-year mortgages. What is he talking about? Like, there's a lot of stuff that Trump is doing, and I'm just kind of shaking my head like, man, this guy's ridiculous. But I know it would have been worse under Kamala Harris. We wouldn't have had no border at all. We would have had tons of fucking new illegal immigrants. Now the government is paying illegals to leave. I forgot about that. They're running commercials now where they're willing to pay people to self-deport. I could use a STEMI check too, absolutely. But that being said, there's no such thing as free. There is no such thing as free. Okay, so I could definitely use a STEMI, but there's no such thing as free. I can tell you that much. If you give me the STEMI, I'll probably put it in the stock market. I'll take half of it and put it in the stock market because that's where it needs to be, because I haven't, invested anything in a long time. But I could certainly use an extra $2,000. That's for fucking sure. I ain't mad at that. But I would also like for the price of meat to go down. That's what he ran on. He ran on that. I would like for the price of meat and bread and that kind of stuff to decrease. I'm not too concerned about stimulus. Make my money worth more. The Generation Sharingan, I think this whole ICE stuff wouldn't be a thing. ICE stuff wouldn't be a thing if Trump wasn't so vocal about it. And a lot of people did not know Obama was very, very heavy with the ICE stuff. Yeah, that's true. And plus, it's Obama, so they didn't care, right? They only care because it's a Republican doing it. That's the only reason they care. Is they want to utilize this to galvanize the base. They don't really care at all about the illegal immigrants. They just want those people there. If what Trump should do is he should say everybody can stay. He should do exactly what James Madison did with the slaves. Do it with the illegals. Say that for the purpose of the census, an illegal immigrant is 1/4 of a person for the purpose of the census, and get that law passed. And therefore, you would have to have 4 illegals in your state to equal 1 citizen. It would completely ruin the economics of these states, because these immigrants will stay, but they won't get full credit for them being there. The states will kick them out because they're not getting full credit, and they'll have to pay them to be there, which is what they're doing now. But right now, they're counting them on the census so that they can get more representation in Congress. That's the long play, right? And just like and this is what Republicans piss me off because they stupid. They should, and I should have seen it too, but I wasn't paying attention. The shutdowns that they did, they wanted the government to be shut down and for people to lose their SNAP benefits and all that kind of stuff, because they wanted to have that blue takeover that just happened in elections. So now they got the blue everywhere. Now a lot of these places were blue already, but it was a very smart move to have the government shut down, a bunch of people get laid off, a bunch of almost 100 million people lose SNAP benefits, almost 50 million people rather lose SNAP benefits. Even more of those people were not being paid, government officials and stuff. Blame it all on Trump, get those people to vote Democrat, and now you got they started trying to open up the government almost immediately after the elections because Republicans were too stupid and just let it happen. Instead of saying, you know what, if they're going to shut this shit down, they just get rid of it. They need to start thinking about long-term fixes to these problems. Instead of fighting them on the illegal immigration issue, force them to take it or leave it. Don't say, well, we're going to offer amnesty. No, we're going to do a 1/5 or 1/4 compromise on the illegals. They can stay, but they cannot accept any federal help. They're banned from Social Security. They're banned from welfare. You can do whatever you want to at the state level, and they only count for 1/4 of your population for the census. So every 4th illegal is 1 citizen. That's how they limited the power of the South during the days of slavery. That's how they should deal with the power of places like California and New York and Seattle and Washington and Oregon that are piling on illegal immigrants. You can't count them in the census because then they can't get the appropriate federal money to take care of them. They're going to get rid of them. They're going to overload the education system. They're going to overload the welfare. They're going to overload their hospitals. And that's exactly what's been happening in the last several years anyway. Eric Adams came out before he got ousted as mayor. And part of the reason why they ended up ousting him as mayor and started talking about how corrupt he is because he broke rank and started talking about this is going to destroy us. There's too many illegals in New York. This is a big, big issue. The PR disaster of a 3/5 compromise reboot would be enormous. I would do it anyway because it would be the opportunity to offer amnesty. You don't want us to throw them out? Okay. Because you know why the Democrats want them there. They don't want them there because no human being is illegal. you want them there because you want to count them on the census. So we're going to say, go ahead, count them on the census, but they only count as one quarter of a person. Guarantee you they're not going to go. The bids of the fourth like, I appreciate it. The bid says no illegal immigrants gets welfare or Medicaid and Medicare. That is illegal. Anyone gets emergency care because we don't have people dying in the street or emergency rooms. They do get Medicare and welfare. Trust me. These states are given, just like they said that none of these illegals were getting driver's licenses. They were giving them driver's licenses with no names on them. Like, these people are lying. Obama went through due process. Obama was not going to immigration hearings and deporting people literally at court after their hearing. Well, maybe he should have. Yeah, Trump is very, very, very aggressive. I give you that. But there have been more illegal immigrants since Biden was in office. Because remember, we pretty much had an open border at that point in time. So we have to be more aggressive now than we were then. The bid says the check is coming from U.S. businesses that are paying the tariffs. Come on, fellas, you guys do know who pays the tariffs. Yeah, I mean, we know the people pay the fucking tariffs because we're the ones paying for the goods and services. He needs to just drop the service. He needs to just drop the goddamn tariffs. He needs to drop the tariffs, get rid of the damn tariffs. Let the people buy stuff cheaper. I get it, but this is what protectionism is all about. You know, when you're trying to be protectionist and you try to protect and take care of only a few people, the people who, if you want to be protectionist, then the best way to do it would be to get rid of foreign outsiders from doing stuff that threaten our national security. For instance, if you want to ban the Chinese from buying farmland in the United States, I'm all for that. We should ban like the Chinese and the Saudis and the Qataris or whatever from owning newspapers, from owning farms, and we should ban all of that shit from outside. Now they would just set up straw men in the country, which is I'm pretty sure they would just do that. But that would at least put somebody in the U.S. that we can point to and say, you are a traitor. You are seditious. You are buying land or whatever on behalf of a foreign government. And we could throw your bitch ass in prison. And that stuff is national security issue because it's really bad up in Canada with the amount of foreign investment going in that country. And it's also going to get pretty bad in other places too. The bid says someone who has temporary protected status is not illegal, but they are now being treated as illegal. If you are here on TPS or amnesty or migrant status, then you should not be illegal. If you are not a legal citizen, then you are here at the pleasure of the United States. You're not a citizen. Now, you might not be illegal, but you're not a citizen. You shouldn't be here. Get out of here. If we're throwing everybody out who are not a citizen, you're not a citizen, get out. We'll deal with the rest of that shit later. But generally speaking, I agree with you, though. Generally speaking, I think that there's a certain class of individuals, people on visas and stuff like that. I wouldn't like deport all the lucha libre wrestlers and stuff out of the United States. I wouldn't do that. But generally speaking, we don't have time to sift through this because, again, we had a wide open border for 4 years. All sorts of people came through at that time. If you slow down the process, especially with these courts the way that they are now, they're so politicized now. These courts will drag out each and every hearing to the last possible second and probably still rule against the government and keep the person here. Some of these people who have been deported, they've been told to leave numerous times. Some people have been deported several times already and they've come right back. We don't have time for this. right? Like I'm not for, hey, we should just break the law and do whatever we want. But the facts are the facts. If you shouldn't be here, get out. Like we need to get this under control. This is an extreme emergency. It's going to bankrupt some of our cities. It's absolutely destroying our housing market. It's destroying our education system. It can't go on. It can't go on. There needs to be some relief from this. And we don't have time to go through the slow, biased court system saying that, oh, yeah, there's need. I don't even understand why we have an immigration court. If you don't have legal status in the United States, you're not a student, and you don't have an employer say that you work here, you shouldn't be here. What more is it than that? And all of this stuff is just bullshit to drag it out anyway. Right? If you are a student at the University of Michigan, then the University of Michigan can vouch for you being there. Hey, we admitted this student on this date, and their status is that they're illegal until they graduate. Now, if they've graduated 10 years ago and they're still here, we should throw them out because you were here as a student and you have allowed that to lapse. You shouldn't still be here unless you filed to be an American citizen. And those situations maybe should go to court. But a lot of these people with their phony paperwork and phony and they do this stuff with not just illegal immigration. They're doing this stuff now with the squatters. These people are bringing up fake paperwork, saying that they're renting in a place that they shouldn't be in, and then they're dragging it out in court. This is lawfare. You have to stop this. This needs to change. I understand, the legal system, and it moves very slow and yada yada. No, sometimes you got to speed things up. Sometimes things have to move a little bit faster. Taking billions of dollars from American business and then giving us a $2,000 check is ridiculously stupid and diabolical. I would rather just keep that $2,000 in my own pocket because I don't like the idea. Stop doing the tariffs. I said it before he was even president. The tariffs are stupid. It's so dumb that the tariffs work against him. He doesn't even realize that, and this is where I think Trump gets a little ignorant. The tariffs are actually working against him because now people are paying more for things. It's like you put tariffs on. Now he was doing reciprocal tariffs on some countries, but still, how can we build houses? Because I know housing is a big problem in places like New York. How can you build housing if you have to pay more for lumber and metal than you would have had to 2 or 3 years ago because of tariffs? How can people buy office space if it costs more now to build a skyscraper than it did 4 or 5 years ago? You have to create a stable economy. The Democrats are going to run on getting rid of these goddamn tariffs, and people are going to be happy about it. And there's going to be some relief when the tariffs are gone. But ultimately, they're going to load up with other regulations that are going to jack up the cost of things too. And that's going to be something that I'm deeply concerned about, is the country being overrun with immigrants, specifically Muslim immigrants. And when they finally get in power, them doing globalist World Economic Forum shit. That's the kind of stuff I'm concerned about. But my frustrations with Trump are minimal compared to what I know would have been the problems with Kamala Harris. I just gotta chew through it. Unfortunately, tariffs have been hitting us import collectors. Yeah, like I know you guys. It's been a difficult thing for a lot of people who like stuff that comes from other countries. You know, guys like, you say collect Gundams and stuff, models and things. It's been tough because this stuff it's affecting everybody. Like we were like, oh, it's gonna save this business or this industry or whatever. And it's like, yay. But ultimately, to what end? you know, to what end? But hopefully we can get a handle on some of this stuff, man. Because Trump's not going to be around forever. Hell, he might not even live through this entire run. He is 70 something. So we'll see. There was already people talking about how Trump might run for governor of New York after he runs for president. And I laughed at that. I thought that was pretty fucking funny. 80-something-year-old Donald Trump running for governor of New York. Wouldn't that be something? The Biz says the main problems are President of the United States just has a problem with facts, like the Walmart Thanksgiving thing. He was clearly wrong and just won't admit it. I think that's ego. That's another ego thing. He ran on the tariffs. People wanted the tariffs. I don't know why they wanted tariffs. He ran on illegal immigration. That's what people wanted. That is a problem. There was plenty of black people out there saying, look, we're overrun with illegals. Especially in places like Chicago and Los Angeles. It's a big goddamn problem. He's also out there dealing with general crime, which he shouldn't even have to do anything about because it's not federal. But when you have district attorneys and governors and police chiefs who are refusing to enforce the law, he's talking about sending in the National Guard. Now, he wouldn't have to do that if these people would not be politically rebellious and do their fucking jobs. But he should also push for laws that would fix this problem. Again, you don't have a constitutional right to police protection or to a competent district attorney, etc. Make it so. That's what it should be. You want to fight this asymmetrical lawfare? Make it so. Or you need to be a little bit more slick. Like the Chicago thing is very, very bizarre, and in New York is going to get very bizarre too once Mom Donnie is really in, because these people run on hating the police, but they need the police to enact their policies. So it's a very weird thing to see Brandon Johnson, who talk about how the police is a sickness. At the same time, he wants the police to arrest ICE agents. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? You just said that they were a sickness. And now all of a sudden, you want them to help you? If I was the police chief, I'd go on strike. Fuck Brandon Johnson. I would just go on strike. And I would say, whatever happens to you and whatever happens to this city happens. And I would not come back. Would not come back without concessions. For starters, we want a written apology that you called us a sickness. Secondly, I don't want to be involved in your dick measuring contest with the president. Third, I want a district attorney who's going to keep criminals off the street. So I want a consent decree or something like that they will actually punish criminals that we snatch up off the streets, or we're not coming back. We're just going to go on strike until then. Now, a lot of people don't like police strikes. I don't like police strikes. That's the best way to get out from underneath all of this shit. When the mayor hates you and is trying to use you as a weapon against the federal government, get fucked. I would get the hell out from underneath that. Quick. He said he ran on getting rid of dangerous criminals, and it turned out ICE at Home Depot in the mornings. Most people are not in favor of that. Yeah, but ultimately, We wanted to get rid of all of the illegals. The dangerous criminals, I mean, hell, again, I just talked about this, where these people are lying and the DAs and such are not prosecuting these people. All right. I've been at this for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Thank you guys for stopping by. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out and be blessed.